The Easter story is the center of Christian faith. Like earth around the sun, our lives orbit the mystery of Jesus alive and the tomb empty. The Easter story that culminates this morning is the center of our Christian faith, just as the earth we live on orbits the sun. Our lives orbit the mystery of Jesus being alive and the tomb empty. The resurrection of the beloved person whose life we have been following these past few months is not a one-time miracle that proved that Jesus was God. Jesus' death and resurrection names and reveals what is happening everywhere and all the time in God and in everything that God creates. Our lived reality, our living, is always moving toward resurrection. As prayers in our celebration of life affirm, life is not ended but merely changed. This is a divine transformation we all long for, which is fully revealed in the entire physical universe. This is why I believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus, even if it is a new kind of physicality. Paul struggles with this as we read in Corinthians. He writes, "But someone will ask, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body will they come?" He writes, "How foolish! What you saw does not come to life unless it dies. When you sow, you do not plant the body that will be, but just a seed, perhaps of wheat or of something else." Resurrection is not an isolated miracle. For so long, I think this is how many of us have come to understand the resurrection, an isolated miracle that affirmed the divinity of Jesus. Easter was an event to prove that Jesus was the Christ. The resurrection is an enduring relationship. The best way, then, is not to say that Jesus rose from the dead as though it were self-generated, but to say that Jesus was raised from the dead, as many of the earlier texts did state. The eternal Christ is therefore revealed as the map or the blueprint, the pledge, the guarantee of what is happening everywhere, all summed up in the person of Jesus, so that we can see it and understand it personally. I wonder if this is not why Jesus named himself the Son of Man, to get the message across that he was the archetypical human. Jesus' resurrection is not so much a miracle we can argue about, believe or disbelieve, but for us, for each one of us, an invitation to look more deeply into the pattern of death and rising in all that is human. Jesus, or any member of the body of Christ, cannot really die because we are all participating in something eternal, the universal Christ that has existed from the very beginning. When we say that, remember the verses from John we have focused on over these past few months. It goes, "In the beginning was the Word, the Christ," and later on, the Word became flesh. Death is not just the death of the physical body, but all the times we have hit bottom and must have let go of how we thought life should be and surrendered to a greater power. And in that sense, we all probably go through many deaths in our lifetime. The end of a relationship in which we had hope of a beautiful life. Addiction to drugs or to alcohol. The soldier coming home dealing with the horror of war, which leads to a sense of hopelessness. Committing a criminal act. Coming from a broken home. I think we can each name our own low point. These deaths to the small self are tipping points, or we have called them hinge moments in life. Each of them opportunities to choose transformation. We have all been there and will be there again at some point in our lives. And today, humanity is living this struggling with the pandemic we are now living through. When we go to the full depths of our pain and suffering, sometimes even depths of our own sin, we can always come out the other side. And the word for this is resurrection. I just want to say that again. When we go to the full depths of our pain and suffering, and over the past 6 months, our community has experienced a lot of pain and suffering. Sometimes even to the depths of our sin, we can always come out the other side. And the word for this is resurrection. Something or someone builds a bridge for us, recognizable only from the far side. We can't see it, which carries us across either willingly or even dragging our feet. Something or someone seems to fill the tragic gap between life and death, but only at the point of no return. None of us crosses over by our own effort or merits, purity or perfection. We are all carried across by an uncreated and unearned grace. From the Pope to the President to princess to peasant, it's always the same. The tomb is always finally empty. There are no exceptions to death, and there are no exceptions to grace. And I believe with good evidence that there are no exception to resurrection. I think it's unfortunate that many of us turn bitter and look for someone else to blame when things fall off the rails. With what happens in life isn't what we expected. When we choose this course or response, our small death will indeed be death for us, because we close down to growth and new life. But if we choose to walk through the depths, even the depths of our own mistakes, we always come out the other side, knowing we have been taken there by a source larger than ourselves, which is God's perfect love. It is the same source that Jesus trusted in that let him see through and beyond the suffering of the cross. I believe that this is what it is meant to be saved. Being saved does not mean that we are better than anyone else or that we will be whisked off to heaven. It means we have allowed and accept the mystery of transformation here and now in our living and as now, so later. If we are to speak of miracles, the most miraculous thing of all this is that God uses the very thing that would normally destroy us, the tragic, the sorrowful, the painful, the unjust, to transform and enlighten us. By holding on to the message of the death and resurrection deep in our hearts, we become indestructible. There are no dead ends. There's always a better tomorrow. I think this is what it means to be saved by the death and resurrection of Jesus. And it is not a one-time transaction, but the constant pattern of all growth and change. Jesus is indeed saving the world by guiding us through all would-be deaths to a life that is always bigger than death. If I want you to take anything away from the message, it is this. I believe the meaning of the resurrection of Jesus is summed up in this line from the Song of Songs. Love, love is stronger than death. If the blank white banner that the risen Christ usually holds in Christian art should say anything, it should say, love will win. Love is all that remains. Love and life are finally the same thing. And you know that for yourself once you have walked through death or walked through the valley. Love has each of you. Love is you. Love alone, in your deep need for love, recognizes love everywhere else. Remember that you already are what you are seeking. As Paul states, any fear that you lack of fidelity would cancel God's fidelity is absurd. Love can finally overcome fear, and your house will be rebuilt on a new and solid foundation. This foundation was always there, but it takes a long time to find that. It is love that alone lasts. All of you have loved in your life and been loved by our eternal and true. The promise of Easter and the beauty of our Christian faith. Jesus Christ has risen, showing us the complete roadmap for life. Because of this Easter story, we know that there is something better ahead of us. Prayerfully, the pandemic we are living through will transform all of us into a more just, compassionate, and loving society. That would be a resurrection.